What's up, everybody? My name is Matthew, and today I want to talk to you guys about how many emails or DMs you need to send before you can understand if your marketing campaign is working or if you need to make a pivot. So let's just get right into the question. I'm going to discuss the problem first. So you don't know when to keep pushing, when to quit sending emails and DMs. You don't want to waste any time. You don't want to waste money getting leads, scraping them, validating them, and then reaching out to them with an offer that doesn't necessarily work or just doesn't work for that niche that you're sending to. The other thing is that you don't want to send those, if maybe those leads you're getting are good and maybe your offer is good, but maybe the leads don't want that particular offer, or maybe your offer could be better suited for a different niche. You could be selling something different if you wanted to. The final thing is that the leads might be precious. I think there's a lot of leads out there, and you don't need to worry about it too much. But there is a case to be made where you could be going through leads, sending emails to them when they might just want some other service, something different than you're offering. So it's best if you can find a way to systematize how to understand. At what point am I going to start making adjustments to my campaign, to my offer, to my niche, and when can I really draw the line in the sand of, okay, I've sent 2,000, 5,000 emails. Is this enough to warrant evidence of change or of success? So the solution, how do we get this number? I need to send X emails before I will be convinced that this campaign needs revision or this campaign is successful. The same could go with texting or just any cold outreach mechanism, really. Just how much do I need to know? This could work with advertising as well, like very easily. It's very analogous, but I just want to stick to cold outbound context for now. So we're going to talk about DMs and emails. So the first thing we need to do to answer that question of what is that number? Well, first, there is no magic number, but we're going to give you a framework of thought to have a ballpark estimate of what is a good number. The first thing is defining a metric. You need to define a metric that is going to be a calibrator or sort of the ground truth of something that you're going to measure about the success or failure of a campaign. My campaign is successful if I have a 1% positive response rate, if I have a 1% opportunity rate. I'm going to get into the distinction between those, but think about positive responses as a positive response rate as the number of people that you reach out to, or the number of emails that you send out of, I should say the number of people who respond positively to an email that you send. So if you blast 1,000 emails and you get 10 responses, you have a 1% positive response rate if those responses are positive. Usually it's not the case. Usually you might have like a 3% response rate, right? So 3 out of 100 reply, but then maybe one of those 3 is actually like a positive response, and the other 2 are just either like an automated response or something, or just like a get lost response, and they don't want to talk to you again. So that's just how you can think about these 2 rates if you didn't know already. The second thing is we want to define the population or niche. There is like this case where like, oh, you got to define your niche before you make an offer or something like that. That's probably true, or it's just a different conversation though. When I'm talking about a population or niche, it's defining the population that you are reaching out to. Like, you have to be able to put a quantifiable, or I should say qualifiable name to it. Like, this is I am reaching out to all appliance repair companies in a certain area, or maybe just in the US, or maybe I'm reaching out to salon owners or pool landscaping companies or something like that. Just define it as well as possible. Again, it's like usually you do that so that you have a specific offer or a specific problem that you solve for that niche. But in this case, it's going to be for defining like the statistics that we're going to run, which is going to be in the next step. But you have to define the population or niche. Then you need to establish a good rule of thumb for this number, this magic number. So off top, I know that I need to send about 2,000 to 5,000 emails. Even though this rule of thumb that I'm going to get into is like the minimum amount you should ever use, but it's going to be a good heuristic for you nonetheless. Finally, or fourth, we're going to try and confidently estimate and calculate the value of the rate if you were to keep sending to this niche indefinitely. So if you were to keep the value of the statistic or the metric, that is. So if I send 3,000 emails to this niche and I have a positive response rate of 1%, how confident can I be that if I were to send to every single other business in that niche, that rate would be 1%? Would it be 0.5% to 1.5%? What is the range of confidence that I have there? So usually it's not going to be the exact number that you get on your sample, but it's going to be able to, you're going to be able to form a range around that number. And I'm going to show you how to do that. And then by giving you the tools that you need to calculate and interpret these results yourself. So before we do this, we have to do a little bit of a statistics overview. Statistics is literally it's a great, classical statistics is a great overview, or I should say system that we can apply to this problem. It was made for it. It was made to generalize information about a sample to a bigger population, okay? So here's some examples of just inferential statistics. You're guessing a number or a metric about a population using a sample, a random sample. So guess the average height of NBA players using a random sample of 100. So the metric there is average height, the population is NBA players, and your sample size is 100. Guess the proportion of people who prefer Trump over Kamala Harris by sampling 100,000 U.S. citizens. Population or niche, U.S. citizens. The proportion of people who prefer Trump over Kamala, that is going to be a percentage, right? So that's the metric. So exactly what we're trying to do here, it can be applied to cold email. So guess the positive response rate of my cold email script when sent to local restaurants in some place. Guess the success metric of my campaign, whatever that is, placeholder, when sent to my niche. This is it. Like, guess the positive response rate of my cold calling campaign when I call salon owners. I guess I'll just use them again. But you see the point. This is like what you're trying to estimate, and you're trying to use a small sample of the total population. So let's say there's like 1 million salons, and you want to, you can't reach. You could reach out to all 1 million salons, and if you have the feasibility to do that, just do it. You don't need to ask what's the right number if you have it in your means to do so at a reasonable cost and whatnot. But usually you have to send to a subset. And it actually sometimes does make more sense to send to just a small sample, even if you could send to all of them, because you can take the first chunk, the first cohort, and you can run a test, and then you can refine it on the next cohort, and eventually you're getting a better and better, hopefully, response rate or success metric just based on every single iteration. So in all this, there are like statistical assumptions that I really don't need to get into, but I will say that in the context of these campaigns, they're usually met. There's a bunch of random things in statistics, and I'm not going to go into the details of it here. I will give you some search terms you can use if you want to actually go dig into this theory yourself. It's really like Intro to Statistics 101, but I will give you, what you need to search for if you want to go ahead and validate this yourself. So the next thing you need to know about stats is that the larger your sample is, the more confident you can be in your estimate. In stats, we call this, there's something called the central limit theorem, which states that as you continue to take larger and larger samples of a population, you start to converge on a value that is the actual value of the population. So if I take samples of 100 people, and I do that a bunch of times, I'm going to get a bunch of results, like average. Let's just do average American weights. So I take 1,000 people in one sample, and their average is 150. Then I take another 1,000, and it's 160 pounds, and then 150 pounds, and there's a bunch of them. Those will start to converge on the average of the actual population, and that's just like a thing in statistics. Law of large numbers, another thing that's kind of along that same line. But basically, the more you gather, the more samples, the more people you gather in a sample, the more confident you can be in your estimate. So the lower the actual rate of the population is, like when you get values of rate, we're doing rate metrics, right? We're doing percentages. So the lower or closer to 0 that number is, or the closer to 1 that number is, the more data you're actually going to need to validate it. So it's actually really interesting in statistics how that works. But because we're not going to consider like values close to 1, because you're never going to get, which would be like 99%, 98%, that's 0.99, 0.98, that's really close to 1. You're never going to get responses rates like that in in cold outreach campaigns. It just doesn't really happen. They are then warm leads if that's how good it is. But basically, if you have a 1%, if the actual positive response rate is 1% in the population, you actually need more emails to validate that and to get that signal than if the actual rate were 10%. So that's just something to know as well. So in our case, again, I'm going to reiterate, you want to know how many emails or DMs you need to send before you can start to make a decision about, whether or not you need to change the strategy or if you're going to run with it. So again, what do we need to know? We're going to define the metric. That is what, first define that, and that's going to be really very simple. Just stick to positive response rate, which is, again, the number of emails you blast out of, the number of people who respond positively to your email out of the number of emails that you actually send. The other way is like an opportunity rate, which is think about the positive response rate, but instead of the number of positive responses for every email I send, it's for every email sequence I send. So usually that you might send 3 or 4 emails to a single person, and so you're evaluating the success of the sequence of emails, not just of any particular email. That rate will and should be slightly higher, right? Because if I send 4 emails to someone before I get a response, that's more emails for the positive response rate, so that denominator is going to go up, so the percentage is going to go down. But getting ahead of myself doesn't really matter. You get the point there. So it has to be related to the prospect's problem, right? So it has to be so directly related to the prospect's problem and not anything else. So we're not measuring open rates of emails. That's not really a metric that is going to tell you much about how much that niche wants your offer. It's going to tell you how good your subject line is at getting somebody to open an email from you, but not how much that prospect actually wants the solution to the problem that you are solving. So that's why I use positive response rates, because you're basically asking people, do you have this problem? Do you have this problem? But you're doing it in a way that is convincing and that you can provide the solution. So it helps them understand there is this problem, and if they send you a positive response, it's like, yes, I have this problem. Yes, it looks like from what you've sent me that you might be a candidate to solve it. So that's valuable information in formulating both the offer and the niche. Because if you get a bad response rate, the niche doesn't want the offer, your offer sucks, usually. But there's, the point is that you're testing it, and you're not testing the value of if you can open an email or not with the open rate. So that's why we stick to those metrics. It has to be isolated to one part of the sales process. So if we picked a metric that was conversion rate over all the emails we sent, so let's say you send 10,000 emails and you get two actual clients, like cash collecting clients. That is it's good to know that for sure, and that's an important thing to know, but it's not going to help you in context of actually devising a campaign. The reason is because you don't know if that campaign fails, where in the process it failed. There are just too many variables you have to change. You could change something about the email campaign, which is a whole thing. You could change the number of emails you send in sequence. You could change the delay between each email you send. You could change the headline. You could change the case study if you have one. You could change a signature. You could change anything and everything about emails alone, but that's just one part, and that's actually the part we want to stick to. The same might go for a DM process, but then after that, you've got to set up the call. Now you've got to close them on the call. Now you've got to onboard them. So there's and then each of those has thousands of things you could tease apart. Realistically, there's a few variables that are going to move the lever, move the needle, so to speak. But you see, if you have too many pieces of your sales process being tested at once or being evaluated at once by this metric, it's just too many places you could test and iterate on. So you need to isolate them. So the metric should be a proportion or probability. Again, it's got to be a rate. We're not going to measure things we're not going to consider the number of positive responses as our metric. It's going to be positive response rate. You wouldn't also measure the number of dollars per email you send or something like that. Again, good to know for a cost analysis or something like that later on. What's the cost to get a warm phone call? But it's not the thing you're actually testing for. You want it to be a probability or a rate. Again, to fall in line with the statistical test that I'm about to show you guys. you should measure all metrics. Like I said, again, this is kind of like my little disclaimer. You should measure all metrics, but for the purposes of this video, in sampling and answering the question, how many do I need to send? You're going to focus on these metrics. So a great starting point here, if the minimum number you need is you take the sample size times your response rate, your positive response rate, that number needs to be bigger than 10. So then you just do a little bit of algebra. So like I said here, N is the sample size, the number of emails you send, or the number of people you are sending to. And then the P naught, and sorry, that's statistical language, and I just copy pasted this. That's going to be your positive response rate. So I'm running the numbers here. Assuming your positive response rate is 0.5%, half a percent, which is in numbers 0.005, you need to do just an ounce of algebra, just 1 ounce, one step here. And you just need 10 divided by 0.005, 2,000 emails sent with that positive response rate before you can be confident. So if you send 2,000 emails and you have, let me back up. So with 2,000 emails need to be sent bare minimum to have like a decent starting point. I would probably double this number as like a good heuristic, like take this 2,000 and double it. So it would be 4,000 emails to get like a decent rule of thumb. The reason is this is like the bare minimum that you need to actually see like statistically accurate results, which is basically saying like you could change this to be 1%. You could change this to be 2%. Just depends on what you are kind of like seeing in your results. But again, if you only sent 500 emails, like that's not even going to be close. 2,000, I'd be like, no, that's not even enough to validate. So you need to send probably, I would say like double that. Like if I just had to summarize this video, try and send like 4,000 emails in a campaign before you understand if it's worried or if it's working or not, or 4,000 sequences. What's a good positive response rate? This is very, it's really subjective in this, not subjective, but it depends on the value of a client to you. If you can actually get 10 positive, if you can close 1 in 10 positive responses and you only need 1 because you're going to make a bunch of money off of that one person, then maybe you're okay with a lower one. But a lot of people say that 0.5% to 1.5% positive response is good for cold outbound. You'll see like 8.5 is like an average response rate, but we're talking positive response rate. So 0.5%, 1.5%, that could be, and it depends on what you're asking for or what you're asking them to do, the call to action. If you're asking them to hop on a phone call, this is going to be lower. If you're asking them to, like, hey, I'll send you a free audit, or I'll send you a Loom video or something. Do you want to watch it? The lower the commitment, the lower the commitment of the prospect, the higher you can expect this positive response rate to be. So I actually am going to skip all this, like math pretty much, but basically I want to show you very like straightforwardly, like this is how you calculate a confidence interval for how many emails you need to send, roughly between this and this. So we're going to just stick with the example of if you send some emails and your positive response rate is 0.5%, you are going to set a confidence level for yourself, either 95% confidence or 99% confidence. Then you're going to plug these random Z values, which like I'm not going to explain unless you really want me to make a video all about this. I will go into the statistics 101 if people really want to understand the theory. But you just plug that into these equations here. And the reason I'm skipping over this is because I'm just going to give you a calculator to do it afterwards. But essentially, after we run these calculations with that 0.5% and 0.5% response rate and a 95% confidence rate or confidence percentage, we are going to get between a 1% and a 0.1% and 0.8% response rate, positive response rate. That's a very big gap. Saying that I get between 0.2 and 0.8% response rate is a very big gap. Like think about that in terms of like the dollar amount you might earn from those different response rates if you were like looking further down the sales pipeline. If I had a certain closing rate and whatnot, like 0.2% could get me like $1,000 of revenue or $5,000. $10,000 versus $50,000. Like that's a factor of 5. You just need to narrow this down a little bit to a number that's small enough where you can be confident. I wouldn't expect to go any lower than a factor of 2, honestly. Like if a thing can get you between $10,000 and $20,000 a month, or $1,000 and $2,000 a month, basically if this were between like 0.4 and 0.6%, like that's as like any narrower than that, and you're spending so much time and money just to get that extra boost in confidence. It's kind of like the law of diminishing returns, where every additional email you send gets you less and less narrows this confidence interval less and less. So you send 1,000 emails, you might narrow it from this to like this, and you get it in half. Then you send another 2,000, and it's from here to here, and you get closer. But then every additional 1,000 emails sent, you only get this much, and then this much, and then this much. So that's basically that's just like the summary of how you would calculate the confidence there. But the meat of this is that in order to calculate this just so easily, just go to this website, and I'm going to link this in the description. Set the confidence level, number between 0 and 1. Set it to 0.95 or 0.99. The sample size. How many emails are you sending, or how many sequences are you sending? I like to use the sequences. So let's actually just use an example right now. I'm going to log into my Instantly account, and I'm just going to look at the opportunities I have right now. Okay, so I have 1 in 164 sequences started. So that's 164 sent, 164, and what's 1 over 164? 6.00609. Okay, I'll just do that. Okay, so 0.6% positive response rate on that. So the rounding, 4 or 5 is an acceptable number here. I'm going to do 5. Okay, notice we only have 164 samples. It's going to give you this right here. This can't be less than 0 or more than 1. This approximation is not good enough. Larger sample sizes will need to improve the result. So like definitely it just tells you there's not enough data here. There's not enough data here. So the confidence interval is between below 0 and 0.01. This calculation doesn't work. We're actually not hitting that rule, like I said, of the sample size times your response rate being greater than 10. That's not meeting here, and so this test just doesn't even make sense. You can't have a negative response rate. If we look at the first confidence interval here, we see that now it's between 0.002 and 0.009. So that would be 0.2% and 0.9%. Okay, that's some interval. That's still wide and it doesn't help. But let's add another factor of 10. So we're at 0.2 and 0.9%. Now if I send 10 times more emails than that, we go between 0.448 and 0.7%. So you see how that went from 0.2 to 0.9, and now it's at 0.48 to 0.7%. So we're trying to understand the true positive response rates. We sent 10 times as many emails, and we now narrowed that gap. Because from 0.2 to 0.9, let's just say it's 1 from 0.2 to 1%, that's like a 5-factor difference, right? But if we go from 0.4 to 0.7, we just narrowed that from about 0.5 to 0.7. That's less than 2, right? So we have a factor of less than 2 between the minimum and the maximum value of our confidence interval. That's a lot better. So it pays to send that many emails. Now let's just go for like a 4,000 email campaign. That's like a pretty typical like small campaign where if you're just getting started and you've never done it before, it might be helpful to not send thousands of emails every single day. So if you're sending a few hundred a day and you want to get through it like reasonably quick, this gets you between 0.3%, 0.4%, somewhere in there, and 0.8. So this is about a little more than a factor of 2 between the lowest and the highest number, right? So that's how you do this. But then the question is, how do you then go and actually pivot on this and make a decision for yourself? These numbers are to give you tools where you should maybe be thinking. You could think about this in a few different ways. Is the lowest end of this confidence interval sufficient for me to keep this business going? If not, let me adjust. Let me experiment on something. Let me A/B test. And that's going to be another video about A/B testing and being confident when how much better does one have to perform than the other in order for me to think, okay, that too is statistically significant. We're going to talk about that in another video. But to keep it simple here, we're just gonna talk about like doing, when should you make the decision to test maybe. But on the lower end, is this enough for my business to survive? if you need to know the numbers for yourself. If I send 5,000 emails and I get a 0.3% response rate or 0.4% response rate, and then I can close about 20% or 30% of those people, and then their LTV is a couple $1,000 or a couple $100 or $10,000. How much money do I put in the bank if I guess those things? And is that worth it for me? You know what I mean? Or should I spend my time optimizing elsewhere? Usually, if you have a bad response rate, something lower than 0.5%, you could probably do some work there, especially because it is the point in your campaign that is gauging the interest of the niche for your offer. So it's a pretty important thing to optimize. Okay, so let's recap. Let's recap this because we just got into a lot of statistical things. We are trying to answer the questions. How many emails or DMs do I need to send before I need to know if I need to change up my campaign or if I'm good here and I can go work on something else? Okay, we answered that by first defining a metric. We use positive response rates or opportunity rates to do that. Okay, we don't use another metric. Why? Because these two metrics are very good at gauging whether or not the people you're sending these emails or DMs to actually have the problem that you're defining when you're sending them emails or not. That's better than something like an open rate of an email, which is just going to tell you basically how good are you at getting people to open an email. Again, an important metric, and if your open rate is low, you don't even have a good campaign going right off the bat. But assuming your open rate is healthy, assuming your open rate is like reasonably healthy, this is like exactly what you want to be doing. If that's more of a health metric, right? Open rate is a health metric. This is an experimental metric. So we're going to define the population or the niche. Again, this is going to help you extrapolate this value of the true statistical value of the population, right? So if I'm sending to appliance repair companies and there's like millions of them, but I can only send to 5,000 of them, I'm trying to understand this number, this rate, this response rate based on that population. I'm not generalizing it to everybody. I'm not saying that, well, I send this to appliance repair companies, that's going to work for all these other niches. It's not going to work. It might not work for landscaping, might not apply to plumbing and stuff like that. It's just to this one population, and I have a small sample of that specific population. We established a good rule of thumb. So again, you take 10 divided by your response rate, and that gets you your number. And maybe double it. And I would say double it. Like that, the 10 divided by your response rate is like the bare statistical minimum. I would say at least double it. So I would say between 4,000 emails. Okay, that's like the 4,000 and 6,000 emails. So confidently estimating and calculating the value of the rate. Then I gave you a tool to go count. So then finally I gave you a tool to calculate that. I gave you a tool to calculate that easily, and I will have this whole presentation in the description below if you want to look at it. And you can go to this website and you can fill in all your numbers here, and you can get a reasonable confidence interval that will tell you roughly what the true value is of the population, of like how well they would respond to your specific campaign. Finishing, if you want this number to change, you have to experiment, right? Because we're going to run a new, you change your offer, you change whatever. Then you rerun a campaign and you're going to get a new confidence interval. And if that confidence interval is better, then you may have made some success. We'll go into that A/B testing in a different day, but this is basically what we covered today. So let me know if you want to learn more about statistics in the context of business and marketing campaigns, or let me know what you thought of this. Was it too in the weeds? Was it too much math or not enough? Let me know. So please like, share, and subscribe if you thought this video was helpful or gave a new perspective on marketing to you. And I will be back soon with another video.